Hey YouTube, it's Robert Hall, and today I'm coming back at you with another lighting on location video. In this series, I take you behind the scenes into one of my real working shoots. That way you guys can understand the purpose of the photos as well as the creative decisions made to get the results that I did. This is an editorial shoot where we're using the images to accompany a story inside a book. And the story focuses on a student studying in the library. Now for this book, I needed both 2-page options, so that means I needed an image that is going to have the gutter, the center of the image, completely free. That way it doesn't look weird when it gets stapled in the center, and we were also potentially shooting some verticals for cover options. All right, let's get into it. The first set of images features our student actually studying over books right in front of the shelves of a library. Now we picked this spot namely because it had so much working distance. If you've been in a library, you know that the rows are quite tight together, which can make things really difficult, especially when you're trying to include lighting. Now this was like a little study spot in between rows of books, so we actually have about 15 feet of working distance here, which was really helpful. All right, so the first thing I had to do was determine my ambient settings, which ended up being ISO 100, f5.6, and 1/250th of a second. Now the reason that was chosen was to not only knock down all the lighting that is inside the library, which is like really old fluorescent lighting. Maybe it's LED, but if so, it's old as well. It is not good quality lighting, and therefore it has a lot of flickering properties as well as banding color issues, so I just wanted to get rid of that. But I didn't want to go so dark as to eliminate ambient light completely, because we included the lamp on this desk and I wanted that glow from the lamp to be part of this image. So I had to find the settings right in between there, and on this image I'm using the 35mm f1.4 Zeiss lens. So once I have the ambient settings chosen to get the ambient light to my liking, then I can begin adding the flash. And I started with this backlight here, and on this backlight I wanted it to have a lighting pattern, but I didn't want it to be completely flat. So this background lighting was accomplished with a tool called the Magmod Magbeam, and I used one of their Magmasks that just helps to create a little bit of a pattern to the light. It breaks it up, it adds some texture, and ultimately just gives you something apart from boring, flat, solid light. Actually, talking about that Magmod, this provides me a nice little opportunity to talk about where I'm at with Magmod equipment. I'm using the AD200 with H200Rs for the most part with almost everything that I'm shooting. I primarily use the sphere, the grids, and the gel holders. Actually, that's all I use. I don't carry any of the other pieces from the AKR1 kit. So for that reason, I don't use any of those equivalent products from Magmod anymore. I don't carry around my mag sphere, even though I have one. I don't carry around my mag grids. I don't carry around my mag gels. I'm just not really using that stuff anymore. I just find the AKR1 kit to be smaller, more mobile, and do the same job. That being said, the snoot in the AKR1 kit is terrible and I will not use it, so I do still keep my mag snoot around, and the Magbeam is the only thing I really have around that allows me to add texture to light. There is no system like that with the gobos and everything that are actually optically sharp. Nothing like that exists right now for the AD200, so that is why I still keep the Magbeam around. Okay, so once I got that lighting with the Magbeam on the background, then I use a 32-inch softbox. I feel like I've been talking about this 32-inch softbox quite a bit lately. I just want to tell you guys that I actually prefer the Easy Lock softboxes better than the 32-inch grand box that I've been using in these videos lately. Okay, I promise, no more gear interjections. Here's behind the scenes that shows you guys what we did with that key light. We basically had it overhead. I have it feathered in front of the subject because that table has a polish to it, and we've got some like white paper. We're getting a lot of bounce light back into our subject's face, so it's almost like a clamshell setup. Now the reason that we're feathering it overhead from the left is A, to still get short lighting, and B, so that it's not in our image and we have an empty left side of the frame, which just allows us an option for that 2-page spread that I was mentioning. From here, I pretty much kept the same lighting setup and just either modified the props on the table or modified my angle. So I did some where I was extremely level and the entire table was packed with props like tape, paper, and cup, and books, and all that stuff that a student would use to be studying. Some of my favorite images are when I got quite close and actually had something like the books really close to the front element of the lens, so you get some distortion to it. And in this, I just feel like the subject is completely surrounded by books because they fill the background and they fill the right side of that frame. In addition to that, I also backed up a little bit and went to one of the cleaner areas of the table and got really low. That way we get a nice reflection that is also quite dark, and that just allows us a really simple space to put copy over the image if we need to. After that, I took off my 35mm and I switched to the 135mm lens, which is by far has just been like my Now we also wanted to go for that cover shot, so in this instance we have her in between those library shelves that are quite close, unlike the space that we had before, which presents a lot of lighting restrictions. Here's a quick idea of what the ambient light looked like in that situation and color balance for the ambient light. It's a very warm lighting and it just doesn't look very good. Especially when you have these tall bookshelves that absorb a lot of the light, you end up with a really dark subject and brighter background, which just doesn't call attention to the subject. Even if it were much brighter and the subject were properly exposed, then that background is just going to be a very bright spot behind them. So we darkened the ambient light settings that I used here. We wanted a shallow depth of field here, so f1.8, got 1/200th of a second and ISO 400. So we get an extremely shallow depth of field while having a pretty dark ambient environment. So really my only option here for lighting is to again boom light overhead because we don't have any side lighting to work with. Now one result of booming overhead with really soft light really close to the subject, is we get a lot of fall off. So what I knew would happen is her face and maybe like her shoulder, her upper body would be well lit, but everything else like the ground and the books that she's sitting on would fall off and be extremely dark. So right from the jump I grabbed a second light, the AD200 with the Fresnel head on it, and I switched with the Mag snoot. That way I could fire a little bit of light at the books and the studying materials on the floor without lighting up the whole scene with a wider flash. Now I told you at the beginning I used ISO 400, 1/200th of a second and f1.8, and I still found that yellow door in the background to be a little bit distracting, so later on I stopped down even more, f2.2 and ISO 100, which means I made the ambient light 2 2/3 stop darker. I compensated by raising all my flashes by 2 2/3 stops so that my subject is still about equally bright, but my background is now darker. This just puts more emphasis on the subject and less emphasis on the surrounding environment. It also gives a more late feel to the image. It makes it feel like it's later in the day, maybe even the evening, especially with that ambient light peaking at the top, and this just makes it feel like the subject is working hard into the evening studying. Now I was quite happy with that, but I also wanted to try this with a wide angle too, so I simply switched to the 35mm, kept all my settings the same, ISO 100, f2.2, lighting in the same position, and then I just got a little bit lower and showed more of that environment, and especially where the books are in front of the lens that are still being hit by light, you get this nice vignetting feel and it just kind of tunnels you into the subject. So I'm glad that I grabbed this, although it looks a little too dark behind the subject if I'm being critical. I wish I kind of would have opened up a little bit more, reduced my flash exposure, that way the ambient wasn't so dark. The darkness worked really great for the telephoto lens, but I thought the wide angle just needed a little bit more brightness behind her because that kind of looks like a menacing tunnel. Alright, that's it for this episode of Lighting on Location. If you're interested in any of the products that I used in this video or the gear that I use in general, that's all linked in the description below. If you learned from or enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave a comment. Subscribe if you want to see more of my videos, and until next time, keep on shooting.